Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm Johnny Chivers for those of you who are new to this YouTube channel where I make videos on kind of everything AWS. In today's video, we're going to take a look at the web app that I have built using AWS from scratch. It's called the questionbank.io, link is in the description. What we're going to look at is actually the architecture behind this web app for those people who are just starting in maybe a startup and they want to know how to build a full stack application, or even entrepreneurs who don't understand technical things about AWS but want to have that insight before they go off and start building things or employing people to build things for them. With that being said, the question bank itself is a community-driven resource where users submit questions into the question bank app. Other users peer review those questions. They get accepted or rejected as a percentage based on how many people have actually reviewed them and what they thought of them. If they pass, they enter circulation into the bank. Once they're in a bank, a user can make a quiz. This happens on the app. They go in, they select some parameters of what they want that quiz to look like. It runs off into the back end, searches for questions that meet that criteria, finds them, builds a quiz, returns that to the front end, and then a user can actually sit and take that quiz and get a mark and a score of what they got right, what they got wrong, and actually review each question and an explanation behind that. Obviously, the more users we have, the better the app becomes because we get more questions. So this app has to be built to scale. And that's really important when we look at some of these architectural decisions that I've made now. It's so I can scale them in the future, hopefully to meet user need. The app's completely free, as I said, so go check it out if you want, or you can follow along just as I show you things on screen. With that being said, in a couple of minutes, I will jump on the computer and we'll actually take a look at the AWS backend, the front end, and some slides and tie the whole thing together. Before I do that, just a couple of things. The big architectural decision I made here was to use AWS Amplify. So AWS Amplify is a service from AWS that aims to make full stack development quicker for developers and those maybe in startups. It encapsulates kind of numerous AWS services and hosts both front-end and back-end services. Back-end services that it uses is the likes of API gateway, Lambda functions, authorization through Cognito, which is how we're going to log in. And as well as that, it also does things like storage on S3. I do use other services outside of AWS Amplify that I manage. We'll cover them, such as DynamoDB, AWS Lightsail, and an RDS instance. It's nothing too complex, but because I have the AWS skills, I was able to integrate them into my project. The other thing to bear in mind is the actual GUI. There is only a select number of languages that AWS Amplify can handle. The one I'm using is React, which is kind of a common framework for web apps, but just go check the link out for AWS Amplify and ensure that the language you're using, such as React Native or Vue or JavaScript, can be handled by AWS Amplify. With that being said, let's jump on the computer and take a look at how I've kind of put this whole thing together through some diagrams and the actual GUI. We'll cover a couple of important user flows, such as how they log in, how that interacts with Cognito. We'll look at how a user profile is then loaded from the back end to the front end. And finally, we'll look at actually how quizzes are formed by a user selecting parameters and it running off to the back end and bringing a quiz back. So that's kind of like three major flows that we'll cover when we jump onto the actual computer here. So without further ado, let's get a look at how I've integrated AWS Amplify and how I built this startup web app using AWS. So guys, let's take a look at AWS Amplify first. It's designed to help developers and founders like me or yourself build full stack applications on AWS faster. It does this by hosting both the back end and the front end. So the front end is the GUI or the interface that you see on screen, and the back end is a load of services such as authorization, storage in S3, Lambda functions, and APIs on API gateway. So it's actually managing basically all my back end compute, all my back end storage, my authorization for me. So I don't have to look after this, and I'm really just focused on getting development done, not actually the infrastructure itself. So let's take a quick look on this diagram. As you can see, I have AWS Amplify, which really covers all manner of sins on AWS, but it's in the console. Go to AWS Amplify and you can have a look around yourself. So the first thing it does for me is host that front end. A front end for me is coded in React. I keep the code on GitHub. When it is committed to GitHub, it actually builds automatically in Amplify because I have my GitHub connected to Amplify. You can use other source code repositories such as AWS Code Commit. When that is committed by me, AWS builds the front end, tests the front end, and deploys the front end for me, and that's what we see on screen. Amplify also looks after the DNS, so that's the www.thequestionbank.io address that you see at the top for me. I bought that using AWS Amplify, and the two things are now connected. You can bring your own DNS if you already own one. You just have to import it, and after that, it can be set against your Amplify project, and from there on in, you're actually using that as your web address for your web app. So it's really handy in that kind of manner that everything is together. So apart from that, then we have the backend services that AWS Amplify is actually handling for me. And that's that first box we can see on screen. So API Gateway, Cognito, Lambda, and AWS S3 are all being handled by Amplify. And that means that using Amplify on command line in my development environment, I can specify that these services or things within these services, such as a Lambda function, are built, and then it becomes available for me in the cloud automatically by clicking through a few buttons. There's a lot of cloud formation in the background that AWS spins up using AWS Amplify, but I don't know anything about that really. I can have a look at it if I want, but it's all fully managed by AWS, fully CI/CD, and I can just specify I want an API and get on with that API. It's absolutely fantastic. Outside of AWS Amplify on the second box, I do have other services that I use. So it's a bit messy in the sense that they're not connected into the Amplify project in one area, but it means that I actually use Amplify services such as Lambdas to talk to these other services. So I have DynamoDB, which I use for a lot of like website data on the app itself. You can configure AWS GraphQL through Amplify and get yourself DynamoDB tables. In my instance, it was just easier to build them myself in CloudFormation and look after them from there. I have an RDS running, so I have a MySQL instance that actually contains question metadata, and we'll cover exactly how this works. It doesn't hold the questions itself, but it holds the data that we search against to build the quizzes. And then finally, I have AWS Lightsail, which is a kind of containerized EC2 service where I host the forum. AWS Lightsail, it takes the pain away of managing EC2. It took me 3 clicks of a button. I pay $10 a month, and I installed a Discourse server myself using the Git repo. And then that means that the question bank has a fully functional AWS hosted forum that we all can use. And the link obviously is in the description, or you can go into the web app to get in. So on the question bank itself, the first thing we're greeted with is obviously the home screen, but after that we want to log in or sign up. And when we log in or sign up, I actually don't handle any of the authorization myself, or in fact the UI component you can see right now that has the sign in is actually managed by AWS as well. So what that means for me is that AWS in the background, if we have a look at this slide, is all Cognito. So on AWS Amplify, I just said I want to have authorization. I gave it a name and I hit commit, and it spun up the entire back end I need to actually add users and users to log in. But as I said, I don't control any of that. AWS controls that for me, and that's really good because authorization is a massive headache. It's really complex in itself to look after. There's loads of flows, there's loads of laws surrounding the data, but by passing it off to AWS, I don't have to manage any of that information. They keep it all up to standard and laws for me. And again, what should have took weeks to develop was done in a matter of seconds. Once you've logged in, obviously you're greeted with the home page here of a user sign in. A couple of interesting things. The first thing that really happens on this page is that a lot of profile information is brought back. And if we take a look at this slide here, what happens is that when you log in, a trigger goes off in the background to say that the page is loaded. An API that's been built using API Gateway talks to a Lambda function. That Lambda function uses an ID that your user was given by AWS Cognito when it signed in to go to a DynamoDB table that contains information about yourself, just your nickname and the location of your profile picture. It bounces that back into that Lambda function. That Lambda function then returns that onto screen. That screen then uses part of the code returned has a S3 location, which contains your profile picture. It gets that profile picture and returns that to screen. Interestingly, AWS Amplify has a load of libraries for, React Vue, React Native, and JavaScript, which means getting like pictures from S3 is pretty simple because it's already inbuilt your code, provided you have that S3 bucket created by Amplify. So the S3 bucket that contains the profile pictures and indeed actually the quiz data was created on the Amplify console. When I want to interact with that, it's actually a little module, and that module already has all the authorization it needs because I've used everything in Amplify to go grab that S3 object. So where I would have had to set up a server and auth and bounce images around, all that is handled by AWS Amplify in this instance, making something that, again, should have took me weeks, took me days to implement properly. Now, the next kind of interesting thing that I want to take a look at here is when we want to build a quiz. So fundamentally, this is obviously the whole point of the app, apart from users submitting questions for the quiz, but we want to build a quiz. So a couple of things happen. We have that pattern again, where a user can go in and select different options for the quiz, but all that data that you see on screen is just held in DynamoDB. So again, it's that API gateway, Lambda function, DynamoDB, based on the information you're selecting. So if you select AWS, which is the only topic right now, then the next screen will load all the AWS services. When we have other topics, it will then load, the topics relevant on the next screen to what you've selected. And again, that will bounce through a Lambda, go to DynamoDB, grab the relevant topics for that screen. The next kind of interesting thing is actually when we're going to create that quiz, I was having some problems trying to get the data searched. So if you imagine you've entered a load of different parameters when you step through that wizard to create a quiz, and based on what you've entered, I need to go off, or the app needs to go off in the background and find questions. I tried a couple of different things, but what I settled on was an RDS instance that uses MySQL, and I used the text search functionality where basically, based on the parameters you enter, I search fields in the metadata of questions to see what questions meet that criteria. So if you only want beginner questions and you want them on S3, then it goes off into the text search field of the questions and finds that they exist. It returns the ID of those questions to the Lambda function, but the actual questions themselves are held as JSON objects on S3. And the reason for this is basically it's quicker to retrieve a full question than try and build it from the database. So the ID of the questions returned to the Lambda function. The Lambda function goes off the S3, grabs that object because it knows where it lies by the ID, returns it to the Lambda function that then renders it to the screen. So that's how it's so quick at getting those questions. I'm not actually building questions in the background. The questions are pre-made and sitting on S3 ready to go. When you select what you need, the Lambda function hits that RDS instance with all the information. It sends back a load of question IDs that meet that information. And then those question IDs can be used to go to S3 and actually grab the fully formed questions. All those questions go together into an array, and we return that object to the screen, and that's how you get a quiz. Simple as that. It's pretty quick, it's pretty efficient, and it scales really well, most importantly, for when hopefully this app gets bigger. And then architecturally, the last thing I really wanted to cover today was how the server works for the forum. It's actually not hosted on AWS Amplify because I needed a server dynamically that I could run, but I didn't want the headache of actually running one myself. So for the forum, when you click on the button, you actually end up on an AWS Lightsail instance. I do have a video on the channel how to create this yourself, so I'll put a link now, maybe in the top corner or in the description, and you can actually go build your own Discourse server on AWS Lightsail. But I know when I use Discourse, I use one of the plans. This costs $10 a month. Discourse is free off GitHub. I install it as open source, and then we have a complete forum to run. The DNS, actually, if you look at the top, is discourse.thequestionbank. I'm using Route 53, which is an AWS service, to route us to there off the website. So again, because I own that www.questionbank.io domain, I can then route us to that server using Route 33, and everything registers and works perfectly for us. So guys, that's kind of what I wanted to show you today with the question bank, those kind of fundamental things of how AWS Amplify in an architectural sense, not actually in the coding sense, is made to make my life easier building this app. Then those services that I'm looking after myself, and then how that all ties together for key flows within the app. I know there's a lot more detail, and I will go into more detail in this series. We'll take a look at actually AWS Amplify, we'll build a project, we'll see the auth, and we'll compare it into like the question bank. But for now, I really want just to cover the architecture because it's something that's fundamental when you're building apps for scale, and it's kind of complex and hard to understand. And I hope by looking at this diagram, that isn't just all lines. It's actually, here it is on screen, and here it is actually conceptually as well. You're able to join those dots together and get some value in what I've shown. As I said, the web app, thequestionbank.io, is completely free. Link is in the description, so feel free to go and sign up. And until next time, guys, thank you very much.